I'm going to say hello first. I'm David Green. I'm the Chief Program Officer for what we call Roots and Culture. It's pretty much all of the adult programming we do around here, but especially the Jewish stuff, and especially the arts and culture and the book talks. And it feels wonderful to welcome you all to this evening with Zack Bodner and Paul Geduldig. Our mission here at the JCC is bringing people together to find joy and make meaning in their lives through the wisdom and tradition of Judaism. So it feels especially wonderful to welcome you all here tonight because, first of all, we're bringing people together, something we have not been able to do very much of in the last 2 years. This is actually our first book talk back since the pandemic. First use of this space, so welcome everybody. And two, it's especially meaningful because we're actually going to talk about Jewish stuff. Zack has written a wonderful book, and we're going to hear them discuss it. Zack, who many of you know already, has been at the Palo Alto JCC since 2013, led the organization wonderfully, and innovated a bunch of great programs, including Z3. And now, having written this book, we're going to hear more about that. Paul just joined our JCC almost a year ago after having worked at JCCs and synagogues throughout the Bay Area, so he's very familiar with everything that's going on in the hotbed of Jewish life in the Bay Area and has been a wonderful addition to our JCC. It's going to be great to hear from them. They are wonderful colleagues in my experience. They've been mentors to both of me, and they're great leaders in our local community. Enjoy.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. And you can all hear us okay? Great. I can't tell you how nice it is to see real people in real person. It's just wonderful. Zack, it's great to have you here at the JCC of San Francisco. So I'm Paul Geduldig. I'm the relatively new CEO. Someone made a joke out there that I'm in my third trimester. I've been here like 8 months at the JCC. Right. Still counting in months. I love that. Zack, I've known, however, for at least 6 years. Because in my previous role at the Peninsula JCC, Zack and I got to know each other. We've worked together and known each other for a long time. When I mentioned to my family one night that Zack would be coming and promoting his book, my younger son said, "Dad, isn't he the competition?" And he said, you know, that's like the director of Uber inviting the director of Lyft to come speak in front of their staff or their audience. And I said, no, we're on the same team. We're trying to do the same things. And I really do want to, I really do want to reinforce that. You know, Zack, we have always seen each other as partners, as supporting each other through difficult times, as sharing ideas, program ideas, recommendations, people that we should be talking to, supporting each other during the pandemic, along with our other colleagues at the Bay Area JCCs. Zack and I also are often on a call on Monday nights with JCC execs from around the country. So really, there's been a lot of camaraderie. But in addition to that, Zack, I will say this just from the heart. You've become a friend, but you're also someone who is very inspiring to me as a fellow leader, a thought leader, and as the book says, a doer. So I'm really honored to have you here and excited to have a hopefully engaging and interesting conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Paul, for that beautiful introduction. To David, we are great colleagues. We collaborate on a lot of different issues, including how we dress. I think he was going with blue tonight. I was going with purple. We did pre-coordinate that. But we've been friends and colleagues for a long time, and it's great to be here for the JCC San Francisco's Shehechianu moment. Like, this is the first, right? This is a big deal. And when David was telling me that I outsold Dan Pink, I was really excited. I was like, can't get better than that. But just a big thank you to you and your team and Stephanie for putting this together and for inviting me.
Great. Speaking of Shehechianu moments, since this is about why do Jewish, let's do a Shehechianu moment.
Yeah.
So if you know it, you know the blessing, and then we'll translate it. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Rough translation.
It's a good translation.
We are thankful. We give a lot of gratitude and thanks that we have been sustained, protected, and brought to this time. And if there's ever been a time when those words ring true, it's coming out of this pandemic and at this time. So a lot of gratitude to be here, and thank you again for coming out tonight.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into the book.
Please.
So first of all, I don't know how you did it with everything going on. You wrote a book.
Yeah.
Why did you write a book? Tell me about...
I wasn't sleeping. I mean, we've talked about this before. Paul's right. We are on calls all the time, sharing best practices, fetching, because you got to do that, right? You have to have colleagues in a safe space, and we've all, for the last 2 years, had a really rough go of life. Some of us have fared better than others. Some of us have lost people. And right when we just feel like we're getting out of it, then we have this whole Ukraine business that we have to worry about. There's always something, but over the last 2 years, it's been great to have colleagues, and you're blessed to have someone like Paul running the show here. But during this last 2 years for me, I wasn't sleeping much, as many of you probably weren't. And rather than just doing more emails at 1 o'clock in the morning and bugging my staff, I thought I would be a little bit more productive with the time. And this book had been kind of in my head for years. In fact, there aren't a whole lot of new ideas because these are things that we've been trying out at our JCC, at other JCCs for a while. I've been working with my colleagues down in Palo Alto. So it was a matter of putting a lot of these ideas together and fueling the narrative with some stories. But I just started writing when I was up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning and feeling like I needed to be productive with the time and not just going back to work. So that's when I got serious about writing the book and why it happened over the last couple of years. But the real answer to the question, Paul, because I think that's a more superficial answer, it's kind of like how did it happen and why, was because I feel like this is the heart of what all of us have to answer for ourselves. Why? Why continue this thing called Judaism? We have to be able to answer that for ourselves, for our kids and our grandkids. If we can't answer that, what are we doing here? Right? Why are we supporting these incredible Jewish institutions? Why are we trying to help the Jews in Ukraine? Unless we can answer that question, why is this thing important? Why is this Weltanschauung, this world view, this culture, this thing that we've been attached to for thousands of years, why is it important to pass on? Why are there so many people that wring their hands about, oh, I hope my kids and grandkids are Jewish? Why? We have to be able to answer that question of why. And so that's been a question that I've been toying around with since I was young. And I can remember specifically in high school, there was this moment. I grew up in Claremont in Southern California. Peter and I were talking earlier about how it's a tiny little town in Southern California. The colleges are down there. You may or may not know it. But despite it being a college town and on the outskirts of LA, there weren't a whole lot of Jews there. But a couple of my closest friends were Jewish. And I was raised as one of these H2O Jews. Have you heard this term, H2O, high holidays only? Right? H2O. Where you go to services on the high holidays and the rest of the time it's like, but we would do Shabbat every Friday night. Like I knew I wasn't Shomer Shabbos. We didn't keep kosher. Somehow pepperoni pizza outside the house was kosher, but not inside the house, right? Like we had a unique way of doing this. But my closest friend, who was Jewish, comes home with a non-Jewish girlfriend one day, and his father rips into him, just lays it. It was like one of those Fiddler on the Roof moments, like, Tevye's going to tear his. And I just couldn't understand why. Because this was a family that was not very Jewish. And I don't even mean like observant, because we weren't that observant either, but it just wasn't that important to their family. I remember once they went to Yom Kippur services and he came back and he had a ham and cheese sandwich afterwards. Right? I'm not kidding. And that's fine. No judgment. Like I said, we have our own way of keeping kosher. Mm-hmm. We don't keep kosher in the house. We keep kosher style. That's how I was raised. My father didn't even eat the shellfish. We ate shellfish out, but I remember one time he ordered the lobster bisque at a restaurant, and we kind of all looked at him because we knew he was like, you didn't eat shellfish? And without missing a beat, he says to the waiter, hold the lobster. And it wasn't a joke. And the waiter's like, sir, it was like, the 5 easy pieces moment, right? Like, what do you want me to hold? He's like, what? Hold the little garnish on top, you can leave that off. That's what my father told him. That was holding that. That was like our version of kosher. So no judgment about my buddy who had his ham and cheese sandwich. But if that's the way you're going to do Jewish in your home, then when your kid comes home with somebody who's not Jewish, okay, what do you expect, right? It's incumbent upon us as parents and grandparents to live this life and help explain it to ourselves and our kids, regardless of who you spend your life with. If this thing called Judaism is important to you, you have to be able to answer the question of why. So that question, Paul, has been swimming around my head for a long, long time, and that's why I felt like I wanted to put it out there. Let's answer why.
So I've known you long enough that you are very careful about your words. You're very choosy about your words. And I was struck by the title of the book, Why Do Jewish? And I know that Why Be Jewish was already taken by Bronfman, and,
Right.
and there was some other, so maybe there was some cease and desist letters that came out. But I know you well, and you didn't say what is Jewish, how to be Jewish, why be Jewish. So why the title?
It's a good. I should have called you when I was searching for titles. These are good. No, there are 4 books out there with the title "Why Be Jewish," and I did do my research, and Bronfman has one of them. But for me, it wasn't about the being, right? In my mind, that's a very old school way of thinking about our Jewish. In my mind, it's about the doing. And in the opening of the book is a quote from David Ben-Gurion, which is, "Words without deeds are nothing." For me, it's all about the doing. You know this old saying, like, "Oh, it's okay, it's the thought that counts." You know, when you don't get around to doing something, "Oh, I meant to send you a birthday card, but it's okay, it's the thought that counts." People say that to make you feel better. But no, just get off your butt and do something, right? Like, it's about the doing that matters. And so I thought, this is what it is. And we had an incredible rabbi, David Wolpe, who came to speak at our JCC years ago, pre-COVID. And he said, look, if somebody were investigating you and trying to, like, prove you were Jewish, as if it were some sort of, like, looking for evidence, as if it were crime, how long would it take them going through your home to figure out that you were? What are the things you do? What are the books on your shelf, the mail, the pictures on your wall? Like, and it got me thinking about the doing, right? The TACOLIS. You know, I know we'll get into that, and then there was something that happened, Paul, that really triggered it for me. We have a woman on our board of directors at our JCC who's Japanese. This woman is she married a Jewish guy. She's not Jewish. She didn't convert. She likes to call herself the Japanese shiksa. It's her cute little term of endearment for herself. But this is a woman who, she was schlepping her kids to JCC preschool. She's now taking her oldest to bar mitzvah classes. Mm-hmm. She makes Shabbat dinner on Friday nights. She makes a heck of a Passover Seder with these really cool Japanese dishes. She's co-chairing our mission to Israel this summer. Like, she's the Jewish one in that couple. He happened to be to be born of Jewish parents. But for him, it's like, that's it, right? Like, but she's the one who cares. She's the one doing Jewish. So in my mind, it's about the doing. And that's what we have to embrace. It's how are you living this life? If it's important to you, like anything in life, if it's important to you, you're going to do something about it, right? So what are you doing to show that you're Jewish? So that's why, for me, it was about the doing and the terminology.
About the doing. And then you have a subtitle. So why do Jewish? Nice, quick. And then a longer one here. A Manifesto for 21st Century Jewish Peoplehood. So we talk about this a lot. What do you mean by Jewish peoplehood? And is that a concept that really is still relevant? Is it still important? And if so, why? And how has it been evolving and changing over time?
Oof, big
Easy question.
Yeah, right. How much time have we got? And I think we're podcasting this or live streaming this too. So, I want to make sure I'm looking in the right places. So just guide me, Scott, where I should be looking. Okay, thank you. Look, the reality is, if I asked you the question, what does it mean? What is Judaism? I think a lot of us would have different answers, right? Is it a religion? Is it a nationality? Is it a culture? Is it a moral code? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a worldview? And the answer is none of the above and all of the above, right? That's why I consider the term people, and us as a Jewish people, it incorporates all of that stuff, right? Because you can be Jewish and be an observant, praying 3 times a day in a minyan Jew, or you can be an atheist, right? You can be Jewish and you can have white skin, or you can be Jewish and you can have dark skin. You can be Jewish and Yiddish could have been your family's mother tongue, or Ladino, or pick your language. Now we know that there are African American Jews and there are Indian Jews and there are Asian Jews. And my assistant at the JCC in Palo Alto is a Filipino Jew. So how do we define what it is to be Jewish anymore? But to be a people. And I like this term peoplehood because it gives a lot of flexibility in there for what it means. And I think that in this moment, actually, Kathy and I were talking earlier about this kind of how do we think about and feel about this Ukraine moment, right? It's got a lot of us, we got a lot of tsuris, a lot of angst about this moment. But I think about this, Paul, because in a lot of my book and a lot of where I come from is about the Israel thing, as we've talked about, right? And Israel plays a prominent part, which we can talk about. But too many diaspora Jews today are judging their relationship with Israel, and hence even Israelis, by Israel's politics or religiosity. by their policies, by their government. But it's a mistake because that doesn't take into account the fact that we are a people. And when you look at the Jews in Ukraine, who the JDC or JFNA or Jewish Family and Children's Services or Israel Aid or United Hatzalah are really working night and day to try and help, they don't ask, are you a right-wing Jew or a left-wing Jew? They don't ask, are you secular or are you Orthodox? They don't ask, what are you, politics? Are you communist or capitalist? They don't ask. They recognize that we're just part of the same family. When we were getting the Jews out of the Soviet Union in the 80s, we didn't ask. Mm-hmm. We were just part of the same family. We were mishpacha. We were brothers and sisters, right? And so peoplehood today has to take on even more of a level of importance, because when you're looking at Jews living in countries like Israel, where maybe we agree with the politics, maybe we don't, they're still part of our family. And that's why I like this term of peoplehood, and I think we need to kind of embrace it and bring it back. It's not easy, because all of us, I'm sure, have been around family Passover, Seders, or Shabbat tables where there's difference of opinion, right? And you got people at my Passover Seder who love Trump and people who hate Trump, right? But that's what it means to be a family. That's what it means to engage with each other, is to have these differences of opinion. That's what it means to be a people. And we have to find ways of living with each other and transcending those differences. And so that's the very challenging part, but the beautiful part of also Jewishness.
So when I interviewed for this job, one of the questions that was asked for me is, why do you want this job? Why are you in this? Why do you do this work? Why do you care? And the answer that came out was not one that I had practiced or rehearsed for the interviews, but it just popped out of my mouth, which was when my mom, who was born in Cairo, Egypt, became a refugee and left and went to France and then came to the States. She was picked up at the airport by HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. They picked up their family and brought them to an apartment that had food in the refrigerator, clothes in the closet, and there was a sense of peoplehood. There was a sense of helping and caring. So that has been something that was transmitted to me from a young age. And it's part of why I do this work. It's part of why I care. But let me ask a challenging, and it's also interesting. I just took my son to college tours, and we were walking around with another family, and then she heard me talking to my kids and saying Elijah and Gabriel, and she walks up to me and she's like, "Can I ask you a funny question? Are you? I heard your kids' names are Elijah and Gabriel. Are you Jewish?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then there was something that happened where there was a dynamic that changed, where we had a different conversation than would have happened otherwise. Yeah. And even before this talk, we were talking about Ukraine and Zelensky, and somehow there was a sense of pride of and Zelensky, and he's Jewish, and there was a conversation about that. So here's my difficult question, and this is not on here on the list, and it's not scripted, so it really may be challenging.
Yeah.
So how do you balance the idea of wanting Jewish pride, Jewish care, Jewish connection, but also being a universalist? Mm-hmm. Also being a part of the human story and caring about other people as well. How does that relate to doing Jewish and not just being Jewish?
It's a great question. And no, it wasn't on the prepared list, so I appreciate that, but that makes it all the more interesting. Look, Sharansky wrote a whole book about this called Defending Identity, which is a great book, and I highly recommend it, and he talked about the way that he could be a Zionist when he was a prisoner in the Gulag was also the fact that he could be a universal humanist, and both are important, right? If you can care about your own family, your own kids, your own spouse, then you show that you have enough feelings to care for the greater world, right? And when I think about this from a Jewish lens, I think about this through the first lens of Tikkun Olam. This book has this.
Tikkun Olam is?
Tikkun Olam is the idea of repairing the world, making the world a better place, okay? Many young Jews today, actually many young people, I don't even say, many young people today define their identity by how they're making the world a better place, right? They may not even know the terminology of Tikkun Olam, but maybe it's environmental justice, maybe it's racial justice, maybe it's homelessness and poverty. People recognize that they want to make an impact on the world. They want to change the world. And that's why there's this whole great resignation. You've heard this term, the great resignation. People are leaving jobs because they found them unfulfilling, and they want to find something that speaks to them and makes their life better and makes them feel like they're making an impact in the world. I asked my board a couple years ago, what gives you meaning in life? And that's the only question I didn't say Jewishly. How does the JCC give you meaning? I just said, what gives you meaning in life? And overwhelmingly, my board members, independently, they all had to said having an impact. Making an impact, right? When you think about it, whether it's with your own family, whether it's with your community or bigger, right? So when you think about the idea of having an impact, it's a very Jewish impulse. This idea, we have a messianic notion as Jews, right, of trying to make the world a better place. We're waiting for the Messiah, but we're not just passively waiting. We're trying to make the world a better place. So when you think about the universalist tendencies, Paul, you don't have to just make the world a better place for the Jewish community. Environmental justice, poverty, homelessness is a universal thing. I'll tell you a quick story that actually has to do with this place. There was, some of you may know Brian Lurie, who used to be one of the leaders of this. Well, so his son, Daniel Lurie, is running an organization called Tipping Point. Some of you may know it. And he was a speaker at, I think it was a San Francisco JCC event, or maybe it was a Federation event years ago. He was one of the keynote speakers talking about the importance of the work that they do to fight homelessness. And somebody in the audience challenged him and said, why aren't you leading a Jewish organization? Why aren't you making a difference in the Jewish world? And he was very diplomatic about how he said it, but you could tell that it got under his skin because he said, I am doing really important Jewish work by trying to help all of those who are homeless in the city. And I think about that vis-a-vis what's going on in Ukraine right now, right? Like if the Jewish community were only going in to help the Jews, that would create a little bit of anti-Semitism, a little bit of animosity. So the Jewish community there is actually helping, and if somebody walks in the doors of JDC, they're not saying like, show me your passport that says you're Jewish. They're going to help people. So that's how you can be both true to your Jewishness, your particularism, your tribalism, and be a universalist at the same time. I think we have to be able to balance both of those at the same time.
So to me, I'm going to answer the question I'm about to ask you.
Yeah.
But to me, that's part of why I love working at a JCC.
Right.
And I've worked at synagogues, I've worked at camps, I've worked in secular organizations. I was a school teacher for a while. I've worked in a lot of different settings. But for me, there's something special about being at a JCC.
Yeah.
So I'll plug JCCs for a second. It is a place, to me, that celebrates Jewish life, Jewish culture, and it shares it, takes the best of it and shares it, creates community within the Jewish community, but also offers an open door to all. And it is the best way to create bridges and connections with other people. And these are the kids that come to our preschool who are not Jewish are still going home and they're talking to their families about the importance of what we call Jewish values, which in some ways are often universal values.
That's right.
But they're talking about Shabbat and rest and taking care of yourself and being with family. They're talking about Tikkun Olam. They're talking, they're going home, and these are the kids that are going to grow up, and when they meet someone who's Jewish, it's not going to be a stranger. It's going to be someone that they have an affinity and connection and understanding with. So to me, that's one of the magic things about the JCC. It's also that we do it through every modality. It's not just learning, although we do deep Jewish learning. It's not just through language, it's not just through ritual, it's through body, it's through mind, it's through spirit, it's through culture, it's through art. That's what I love about it. I also love that it's intergenerational. It's one of the few places you can still go, and you'll see 2-year-olds being brought in, by their parents to be dropped off. You'll see seniors, you'll see singles, you'll see everybody across the lifespan. But you could be working in a lot of different places, Zach. So why have you spent the last X number of years at the helm of a JCC? Why is it important to you? And how does it contribute to the idea of being Jewish? Or maybe I just stole the answer.
You just took the words out of my mouth. I mean, it's true. I'll just share a story, because I like to share stories to make the point. I was meeting a couple of years ago with a family that sends their kids to our preschool. Neither of the parents were Jewish. And I just asked them why they sent them there. I said, we love that you're here. Don't get me wrong. Like, why? Why'd you pick our preschool out of all the preschools? And they said, we love the Jewish values. I said, what do you mean by that? And the mom said, we love that you do Shabbat. And now our kids, they come home, and what we do is a family Friday night dinner. They don't call it Shabbat. They're not Jewish. They say every Friday night, and the kids are a little older now. So a few years ago, they say everyone puts their phones away, and we actually engage with each other. The one night a week that they have a family conversation. So they would come for years. They would come to the JCC and get the challah, like to do their own family Friday night dinner. And I saw them recently, and now they make homemade challah on Fridays as part of their family tradition. This is not a Jewish family, but they love the Jewish value of the togetherness, of the unplugging, of the resting. And I'll say, like, you know, I answered earlier about how I was writing this book during COVID, but COVID was really hard, right? My wife and I had this ongoing joke of, are we working from home or are we living at work? How many of you felt that way, right? Like, because if you're working from home, your laptop's always there, and when you're just bored and there's a quiet moment, you just pop it open. We just found ourselves working all the time. High burnout factor. And it was only after I had a conversation with Tiffany Schlein, who's an incredible woman. Some of you may know, she's a local. She's the author of this book, 24/6. And she talks about a tech-free Shabbat. She doesn't keep Shabbat in the traditional Orthodox sense. She's not Shomer Shabbos, but she said to me, you need to unplug. Like, you have to do it for your own health. I think Kathy may have said the same thing to me at some point. But the reality is, as a medical professional, she was telling me that. But Tiffany was just saying this as a friend. But ultimately, I did. I started kind of unplugging little by little. And this is a Jewish value. That is a universal, the Shabbat is one of the greatest gifts that has ever been given or invented. And when you think about it, and this is what you can do at a JCC. You can pass this on to families who are Jewish or not Jewish. There's no litmus test. This is the other thing. The other reason why I work at a JCC, Paul, is, look, we're living in this moment of terrible polarization and partisanship, right? We are being divided every day by our differences, whether it's politics, whatever it is. And this is a place where you have people of all different stripes, all different backgrounds, all different ages, like you said. There's no litmus test to come in the door. And very few places can say that. This is the institution, JCCs, pre-COVID, when you were looking at the entire institutions of JCCs all over North America, we would see 1.5 million people every single week. Every single week, 1.5 million people would come through the doors of JCCs, of which 1 million were Jewish, right? Which means that this is like the most intentional Jewish space that created intersectionality between Jewish and non-Jewish members of the community. Like, that doesn't exist in any other space, and I love being a part of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to borrow some of that. So the other thing, if you've spent any time with Zack Bodner, one of the things you'll learn is two things. He loves to borrow terms from from the tech world, and maybe that's because he's down in Palo Alto, and he loves acronyms. So this is something I've learned from spending a lot of time with Zack. So first, let's talk about the tech term Judaism 4.0. So it's in your book here. Tell us, share a little bit about that, please.
I think I love the wordplay. My mom was an English teacher, so I just love the rhyming and the acronyms. Like you said, palindromes. My kids, Wordle, big fan of Wordle. You guys playing Wordle? It's right. There's Judel. Have you played Judel yet? Check it out, Judel. It's only Jewish words. It's hard because it could be Yiddish, it could be Hebrew, it could be English. But I love playing with words this way. Gematria also, which is kind of Jewish numerology and the words play. So I've always been into that stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, being down in Silicon Valley, it's kind of contagious. And me not ever having worked in the tech space, I kind of got jealous. So I started talking tech talk. And so we came up with this idea of Judaism 4.0, which really just is shorthand for kind of the notion that we're on this fourth era, or on the eve. I think we're on the eve of the fourth era of Jewish life, of Jewish peoplehood. If you think about it this way, if you kind of think about 1.0 was the Mishkan period. The Mishkan was the Holy Ark. Remember Raiders of the Lost Ark? That was the Holy Ark. When we were wandering in the desert, and we are a mobile people, and our sacred life is traveling with us. We're a wandering people. We're just becoming a people. We receive the 10 Commandments. Like that's our first period of time where we're freed from slavery and we're figuring out what it means to be a people. Wind up back in Israel, and we eventually build the first temple. And that's the beginning of 2.0, because the temple becomes the center of our Jewish life, right? There's a high priesthood now, and there's animal sacrifice now, and there's making pilgrimage to Jerusalem 3 times a year. It changed. When we found our home in Jerusalem, it changed. First temple's destroyed, second temple's built, second temple's destroyed, and then we're dispersed, right? And the rabbis came together and said, now what? How are we going to do this? And that was the beginning of 3.0, this era of like, okay, the rabbis replaced the priests, prayer replaced animal sacrifice, synagogues replace the high temple, so the holy temple, and that's what we've been living for the last 2,000 years. For 2,000 years, we've been living in this 3.0 moment. But starting with the Enlightenment, there started to be cracks in this foundation, right? Because that's when it was like, are we a religion or a nationality? That's when you started to see the Hasidim and the Mitnadim, you started to see those who were the studiers and those who were you started to see these breaks back around the time of the Enlightenment. And now we've come to a place where I think, Paul, the cracks have gotten so wide that people are defining what it means to be or do Jewish differently today. And it may be altogether different. People are not connecting with synagogues. I lay out these 5 reasons why I think, in the book, there's 5 reasons why I think we're at this moment. I'll go through it very quickly because if I give away all the secrets, you're not going to buy the book, right? So, but there's 5 reasons why we're at this moment where we might be into the 4.0, this 4th era of Jewish life. One is this dropping institutional affiliation. People are not joining synagogues. They're not giving to federations. They're not joining big JCCs the same way. Fortunately, some of us are creative enough and innovative enough that we're keeping them alive, but institutional affiliation is dropping. And this is not just me, this is the Pew study shows us. But the good news is it doesn't mean the young people aren't doing Jewish. They are, right? There's these really cool young Jewish organizations like Moshe House and Urban Adamah and Wilderness Torah and At the Well. And there's some really cool stuff happening out there. So the young people, they want to do Jewish. They're like, I just don't want to do it the way my grandparents did it, right? So, but that means there's a change coming. The second is shifting ethnography, right? There's no longer can you look at someone and say, oh, they look Jewish, they don't look Jewish. You don't know anymore, right? You can't look at somebody, and the intermarriage is changing the way we look, and we have Angela Buchdahl, one of the most amazing American rabbis now, a Korean rabbi leading one of the biggest congregations in New York. That would never have happened 50 years ago. Never happened. Jewish grandparents, Jewish Ashkenazi, and now, by the way, I have a very Ashkenormative view of the world, and I own that. But my Ashkenazi grandparents would never have seen the world today and been able to identify it.
Although your children are reclaiming Spanish citizenship to your Sephardic wife's family.
That's true.
They
are, just as your
point that out
just
there.
as your
just
family.
as my kids are as well.
But I'll tell you another quick story because I love to tell a story. My daughter Talia, who's a senior in high school, I took her to the APAC conference a few years back. This is pre-COVID. And as those of you who know, who have been at the APAC conference, they bring out people of all different shapes and sizes and stripes and backgrounds. And there was an African-American speaker on the stage. And it was only when the African-American speaker said something about their Christian faith that my daughter Talia kind of was, wait, they're not Jewish? Like, she had no problem with this person being an African-American Jew. It was the fact that there was somebody non-Jewish that was talking about their love of Israel. That's what kind of like, what? So we have some work to do on that front. But like it was not strange at all to her that there could be African-American Jews. Like, she's being raised in a different environment. So shifting ethnography is that second factor. I think that the third one is brand new in the last 70 years, U.S.-Israel relationship. Israel-diaspora relations. Never before, we're living in this 70 years. We've never before in the history of the Jewish people ever been in a moment where there's a strong Jewish homeland and a strong Jewish diaspora. And we don't really know how to get along, right? It used to be a model where we were supportive, we in the diaspora were fully supportive of Israel, and now they're strong, and they don't necessarily need our help in the same way. They still need our help, but we need their help too. Like, what does that relationship look like? It's going to change for the next 50, 100 years, and that's going to define Jewish peoplehood again in the 4.0 era. The fourth factor is a broadened search for meaning and belonging. People aren't getting their sense of connection and meaning and belonging from the synagogue, the church, the mosque. They're getting it from a yoga class, a spin class here at the JCC. They're getting it from a book group. They're getting it from a Burning Man experience, right? They're getting it from secular ways. And so what does that mean? That's pretty new in the last 50 years as well. And the last thing is science and technology. Changes everything. That's the ultimate game changer, right? Science and technology is changing everything. They have these Shabbat ovens. You see these Shabbat ovens, the people who turn the oven on, they set it before Friday. And now there's self-driving cars. Imagine driving your car, and your car's going to be able to drive you to synagogue. If you want. There's virtual reality goggles. You could put them on, and you could be standing at the base of Sinai for Revelation yourself, right? There's now impossible meat, so you can actually have kosher bacon and kosher pork chops and things. And those are the kind of fun things. But the DNA testing now, it can get really. And by the way, this can go really dark as well. Science and technology is not always positive, right? You can see how it can go in the other direction. But these 5 factors have led us to be on the doorstep of what I think is the 4th era in Jewish life, Judaism 4.0.
So one of the points you made was about Israel. And this is an area where I know you and I are aligned on this, and in a way, I will admit, I've learned from you, and I've appreciated your leadership here. So I've worked in Jewish organizations for a long time, and in the old days, Israel was something that was a unifier for Jewish conversation, and after a while, it became too hot of a topic to talk about, because you'd have some people that felt this way, some people that felt that way, and it was better just to, quote unquote, not talk about it than potentially stir the pot and upset somebody. So one thing that I've seen that you've done in the Palo Alto JCC that I've been impressed with is it's better to still find a way to talk about Israel. Israel is still one of the central aspects of the Jewish people's story of the last 2,000 years. And if we don't talk about Israel, our children are still going to hear about Israel, but they're going to hear about it and not know how to engage in conversation and not know how to ask questions and may hear certain views but not others. And I'm not saying that there's not an open space to have earnest conversation about Israel, to embrace both the beauty and the complexity and the challenges and the difficulties. And no country is perfect. Not this one, not anyone on the globe. But creating a space where there's respect for differences and respect for the conversation itself. And that's something that you've done beautifully in the Palo Alto JCC, and you've been helping to bring it to other JCCs around the country. So it's something that I hope more spaces will embrace, this idea of and there was also, a few years ago, it was like, you can talk about Israel, but all we can talk about Israel is food, music, and technology, right. The startup nation. Those things were cool, but anything else was too dangerous. So what I'm saying is, I don't want to create places of controversy. And I recognize that Israel is complex. But I want to create spaces where there's at least the conversations happening and at least the engagement. Right. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for being a great partner. You've always been a great partner, when you were at Foster City and when you've been here. Look, we try to turn JCCs into the community living rooms. And to have a conversation in a living room, you have to have differences of agreement. And it can't be superficial. It can't just be about the music and the food and the falafel. And I think we have to go deep. And I think we have to be willing to have these tough conversations. Here's the analogy I make. Like when you teach your 3 or 4-year-old about the Garden of Eden story, you teach them about it in one way. And then when they turn 7, you teach them of the Garden of Eden story a little differently. And then when they turn 13, it's a different way. It's another interpretation. Right? As they get older, it becomes more allegorical. Right? You just teach it differently as kids grow up. We're stuck in teaching Israel as our kids were 5 years old. And so what happens is they get to high school and they get challenged, or they get to college and they get challenged. They're like, what the hell did you do? You pulled the wool over my eyes. You weren't being truthful with me. Right? We don't do them any favors. We need to be able to have the good, tough, and as Paul said, if we're not talking about it, nobody is. Right? That's the bad news. If Israel becomes so toxic and so divisive, you're like, no, we're not going to bring a right-wing speaker to the JCC because all the lefties are going to protest us out front. And we're not going to bring a left-wing speaker because that mega right-wing donor is going to pull their funding, right? Like, this has happened before, right? We've seen this movie. We have to have these conversations. We have to bring people in that we disagree with. And I've tried to model that. So in our first year of doing this Z3 down in Palo Alto, we invited speakers that I really disagreed with. And it was really hard for me. And some of you, my good friends that I've known for years in the audience, you're nodding. And I felt like I had to just model that behavior. Because if we can't do it, then our kids are not going to be raised that way, and they're just going to be hit in the face, be like, how can you care about Israel? Look what they're doing to the Palestinians. And that it's just going to be, they're not going to know how to handle that conversation. But we can also transcend that, right? Like there's this great author named Gil Troy, big thinker, great author. He wrote a book called Never Alone recently with Natan Sharansky. But I heard him speak, I think, Paul, when we were in Memphis together, is when I heard this term. He talked about a Trump-opportunity. When Trump was president of the United States, he said, it's a Trump-opportunity for the American Jewish community, because he knew most American Jews at the time, about 80% of the American Jewish community, not a fan of Trump. He said, now this is their chance to see that they can still love America, even if they disagree with the politics and the president. And he was trying to say, like, okay, American Jews who are mostly liberal, not a big fan of Bibi, who was he and his party were running the show for the last 15, 20 years. This is a Trump opportunity to show that you can still love Israel and disagree. You can engage. And why should the whole relationship with Israel be about the two areas of difference, right? The Palestinians and the chief rabbinate. There's a lot more to Israel than the Palestinians and the chief rabbinate. There's a lot more. So let's have a real conversation about those things, but let's also recognize there's so much beauty and importance and spirituality and cultural exchange with that relationship. Let's do it. Let's dive in. Let's roll our sleeves up and let's get into it. That's the philosophy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the acronyms. Zach's an acronym geek.
Yeah,
Can I say
acronym geek, that's
acronym
fine.
geek. He loves his acronyms. If you read the book, you'll see that one of the acronyms he uses is TACOLIS. So what does TACOLIS mean, and
TACOLIS.
why do you use the acronym?
So tachlis is this great Yiddish word. It's been adopted by Israelis into modern Israeli nomenclature into Hebrew. It means like getting down to business, getting down to brass tacks, tachlis. Like if you're sitting in one of these meetings where somebody's talking way too much, and it's just, you can say, no, what's a tachlis? Like, let's get down, it's just too much talking. It's a great word. There's no equivalent in English, but I encourage you to all start using it because we're going to make it part. But I love this word because for me, it's all about the doing, right? The why do Jewish. So I've turned it into an acronym. In the formula for doing Jewish for the 21st century, like if you and your kids and grandkids, if you can do some of this stuff, you can live a meaningful, relevant Jewish life. And that's what we're trying to do at the end of the day. We're trying to make Jewish life meaningful and relevant for ourselves and for our kids. So here's what it stands for. I'm going to go through this quickly. The T is Tikkun Olam, which we talked about, repairing the world, right? Acts that of social impact. The A is art and culture. Art and culture is a really important part of Jewish peoplehood, right? Whether it's the food, whether it's the music. And I get really offended when people say to oh, they're just a bagels and lox Jew. Have you heard that? Like, as if somehow they're lesser than because their food is how it defines them. No, that's a very easy portal of entry for people, by the way. It's a very low barrier just because you identify with the Adam Sandler song. It's okay. Like, if that's what gives people pride, if it's Zelensky giving people pride again in Jewish leadership, fine, start there. Art and culture is a very easy way to introduce people to the greatness of Judaism. So that's the A in Tachlis. C is community. We do community well. It's a central part of who we are. You can't dance the hora by yourself. You can't.
You can, it's just very awkward.
It's very, very awkward. Holding up the chair is really hard. We do community well in those moments of joy, in the moments of sadness, davening for Kaddish, when you're saying a prayer, for you need a minyan, right? Like, so community is a central part of who we are. The H is for holidays and rituals. We do holidays and rituals well. And explore them, try them, make them modern and relevant for yourself and for your kids. I didn't grow up making a sukkah as when I was in Claremont, but now my kids love making a sukkah. You know, this is their way of decorating. They don't decorate a Christmas tree; they decorate the sukkah, right? But the value of Sukkot today, yes, of course, it's commemorating when we were wandering in the desert. We put up these temporary dwellings, but now it's about appreciating the roof over our head and the food on the table. And so I've made it a modern notion for our kids, so they know that there are people out there that can't afford food on the table, roof over their heads, right? So find a way to make the holidays and rituals relevant today. The L in Tachlis is for learning. Learning, we're the people of the book, right? Learning, whether that's Torah and Talmud, or whether that's the modern Jewish canon, whether that's the comedy of Sarah Silverman and Larry David, or the stories of Shalom Aleichem, or the speeches of Golda Meir. Like, ultimately, you have to learn. In this culture where fewer and fewer people are affiliating with synagogues, there's going to be much more of what we call DIY Judaism. Have you heard this term, DIY, do it yourself? To do it yourself, you have to have a little bit of knowledge. You have to learn a little bit. So the learning is really important. JCCs, and I know this JCC has a great adult learning program. These are great spaces to do some learning. The I is Israel, as we've already talked about. And the S in Tachlis is Shabbat and spirituality. We talked about Shabbat a little bit. I think Shabbat is a really important aspect of Jewish life. I'm not saying you have to do it in the traditional sense, but you have to have some sort of level of spiritual, whatever works for you. Buddhist Zen meditation, like finding your connection to the universe has always been a part of what it means to do Jewish and to be Jewish. And so I think that framework of Tachlis, if you can find some elements of that resonate for you, that's how you can live a meaningful, relevant Jewish life.
So I want to be mindful of the time. We had a few more questions, but I'm going to let those go. I will do a plug for the book. So I've read the book, and your master's degree in comparative religion comes through. So there's scholarly aspects of the books. There's personal stories and anecdotes, and there's also just new, engaging and simple ways that he talks about, the way you speak from the heart, the way that you present information in a way that's engaging and accessible, It's a combination of all of those things. So we do have them in the back. I recommend picking them up. Buy 10 for your friends and pass them around.
Absolutely.
And want to open it up to see if there are any questions or comments from the audience. And looks like we...
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I worked with Zack starting 20 years ago, and normally his father-in-law is in the room, for those who know, and it always asks the first question, whether it's a room of 40 people or 4,000 people. So I just felt the need to speak in Ellie's place. So since your first book speech in Palo Alto, you have done Zooms, you've traveled around the country a bit, you've spoken on this topic. And I'm sure some people who've invited you to speak, like other JCC directors, have read your book and said, this is why we want you to speak, or people who read the book before they come out. Is there one point where they're like, wow, this is the one thing that really hit me. This is the one thing that I hadn't thought about. This is the one thing that I'm taking. You really, surprised me. I didn't think about this. This is the thing that I'm going to focus on in doing Jewish with my family.
It's a good question, Sarah. Thank you. It's varied from place to place. I will tell you, I'm very popular with the Jewish grandmother set. It's my sweet spot right there. They often come up and buy like 7 books. I'm like, sign each one for one of my grandkids, each one. And I think it's because a lot of them are finding that their grandkids have married somebody who wasn't Jewish, or maybe that person converted, and they feel like, this is a way for them to be part of our family. It's actually helped them also embrace them. The grandparents who were a little bit skeptical at first, they feel like, okay, this is how our grandkids or our great-grandkids can still be Jewish in the future, is because you make it fun and you make it relevant. So that's been something I've heard a lot. I think the aha has been, the last chapter of the book is called The Next Big Jewish Idea. I know it's a little hubristic, I know. But here, what's been really interesting for me? I'll come back to this. But what's been really interesting for me, I'm a part of this group called JCC Global. Paul and I, in addition to be part of the JCC Association of North America, the JCCs all over the world. And it's been a very humbling experience because I've realized that I don't know anything. I know what I know from my own little perch. So for me to go out there, and I've had a couple of talks with the Jews from Latin America, Jews from Eastern Europe, and I just don't know anything about the Jewish life there. So for example, the next big Jewish idea is this idea, it's the last chapter, called a Jewish leap year. Okay, LEAP stands for Learning, Experience, Action, and Peoplehood, because as Paul said, I like acronyms. But Gary and Kathy Rant have been incredible thought partners in helping make this idea come alive. But it's the idea of taking this gap year, making it a leap year between high school and college. Israelis are already doing this, right? You know that Israelis are going to the army before they go to college. And now, many of them are doing a program called the Mechinah program. They're doing in their own leap year before they even go to the army. Not enough American Jews are doing this, right? So far, the pinnacle of a young Jewish person's education is their bar bat mitzvah. And then it's like, right? We're kind of like, well, let's hope that maybe they go to birthright, maybe Hillel, maybe there's a Jewish wedding in there somewhere. But like, if we can make it normative that most kids take a leap year between high school and college, first of all, how great would it be for their own mental health? Like, kids don't need to rush off to college so fast, right? Let's give them this blessing. Let's give them this gift. Let's help them mature a little. Let's help them gain a little bit of independence before they go off to college. Plus, the idea of a leap year is a peoplehood notion. So now you're taking these programs, half the kids are Israeli, half the kids are diaspora Jews, and part of the time is in the diaspora and part of the time is in Israel. So now you're also introducing Israelis to non-Orthodox, very cool modern Judaism, right? So it goes both ways. So now, imagine the next 10, 20 years, enough kids go on a program like this, they will not define their whole relationship with Israel through the eyes of the occupation or the chief rabbi. It'll be a very different, much more multi-layered relationship with Israel and Israelis. So the leap year idea, I think, Sarah, has been the one that has gotten a lot of people really excited as we've talked about this. And there's people out there like, yeah, sign me up. How do I do this? I want my own kids to go on it. I want to be partners with this. And we're prototyping this with an organization called Binah in Israel. But this is the one that I've gotten the most excitement about as we've talked about it going around.
I was wondering what you have learned about your own views on Judaism through the process of writing this book.
This is a great question. I've learned that I'm not as comfortable as I need to be or would like to be with my own inconsistencies. right? Like, there's a lot of inconsistencies in my thinking that we all have our own inconsistencies, right? I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson who said what is it? A foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds, or something like that, right? But ultimately, I've tried to become okay with this. It's like a cloudy space. There's a story in the Torah about how when Moses goes up to get the Ten Commandments, to get the Torah from God on Mount Sinai, a cloud descends. And it's in that moment when there's a cloud hovering over the mountain and over the people that people are closest to God. And you wouldn't know it because it's cloudy. You can't see. This was Avram Infeld who taught me this lesson, former international director, president of Hillel. He said, you need to embrace your moments of cloudiness. You're in moments of indecision when you just don't know, because he said those might be the moments when you're actually closest to God. And he told me this story. So trying to get there and get my head wrapped around, like, okay, it's all right that I don't keep kosher. It's all right that, that's been the hardest thing for me, while trying to also continue along my journey and do better at the same time, right? That for me it's just an ongoing thing. But that's been for me, I think, what's been fun about it also. Thank you for asking that.
Hey, Zach.
Hey, Bart.
I know you touched on a couple of these relatively new definitions of what being Jewish mean and how they've evolved, whether it's, sort of the different look of Jews all over the world. What is, and all of us have struggled with things like explaining the Holocaust or explaining Israel or explaining these kind of contradictions in Jewry. What is the response, if any, to this new idea that white privilege is something that we are part of, and maybe we saw it with the Whoopi Goldberg incident a couple of weeks ago. It comes up quite a lot. What is the sort of response to that? Not for us in this room who know the answer, but to the broader American community, maybe the lefty community.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not. I don't address it in the book, Bart, but I think maybe there's a second book in there, perhaps. But I'm dealing with it a lot right now. Right? Partly because I lead an institution, as Paul does, that's very out there in the community. And so for a lot of unaffiliated Jews, we're their first call when their kid is faced with anti-Semitism in school. And I'll make this very personal. My daughter's school, they pulled the Diary of Anne Frank from the curriculum. They pulled Night by Elie Wiesel. And there already was not a whole lot of Holocaust education. But they were doing it to make room for some of the more modern ethnic studies necessities, right? And the Jewish kids were not happy, right? And so having that conversation and helping them understand that this is part of our story, right? But not getting into the kind of out-victimizing the other, right? That's not what it's about, but it's helping folks understand that, taking our peoplehood, and that's the term we use, seriously, and educating about it is really, really important. But it's not an easy question to answer, Bart. I'll tell you something that's happened 2 years ago, just before COVID. There was a potential lawsuit at Stanford that I think it got nipped in the bud just before it happened. But Paul, I'm not even sure if you know this story, but the local JCRC was really instrumental in helping. So when Stanford, like a lot of different universities, organizations, and businesses started addressing the DEI issue, the diversity, equity, and inclusion issue, they needed to park it somewhere, and they put it in the CAPS department at Stanford, which stands for Counseling and Psychological Services. Counseling and Psychological Services, they were tasked with figuring out the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. And it turns out that they were defining that whole thing through the lens of skin color. And there were 2 Jewish members of the faculty that were trying to say, hey, I have to report a couple incidents to you where we've faced anti-Semitism in the school. And they're like, you can't be victims. You're part of the white privileged class. And they're like, whoa, wait a second. And they were not being heard. And they brought it all the way up to the highest levels of the administration until finally nobody was listening, and they went to this Brandeis Institute that takes on the Brandeis Law Center that takes on these cases. And that's when they got serious about it, and I think they finally dealt with it. But a lot of these organizations and leaders have the best interests in mind, right? They're only doing this from the right place of like saying, look, we have to be more diverse. We have to be more inclusive. We have to be more equitable. And there's been a lot of, our country is filled with a history of racism, and how do we right that wrong? So it's coming from the right place. However, as Jews, we've been victims for a long time too, and how does that become part of the story as well? It's an ongoing challenge, Bart. We don't have the answers, but it's about having the relationships, having the conversations, working with people who trust you. When you have that, you can go a long way, but it starts from the relationship.
Thank you both for all you are and do. I have two humble axioms, if you will.
Yeah.
Being Jewish means different things to different people and to different Jews.
Yeah.
And that Judaism is an ever-evolving process, personally and community-wise. Having written this book, where are you on the spectrum of evolution, personally and professionally and in the community? And this is maybe the entree for Judaism. Why do Jewish 2.0?
Yeah. Whew. Where am I personally, Gary? It's a great question. Look, I took my kids to Disneyland years ago, and you know the ride, It's a Small World? You know, you're bouncing around that boat, it's a small world. Now you're all going to have that song stuck in your head all night. You're welcome. Yeah, exactly. And we're bouncing through the little thing, and at first it was fun, and by the way, the ride broke, and we got stuck in there for an hour and a half. No joke. I'm not lying to you. You can ask my wife. True story. And that song going over and over again. I lost my patience very quickly. But as I'm on this ride, and I'm looking at the little figurines and the little models, and you know, you're kind of exploring the world, and you're seeing the Arabs in their tunics, and you're seeing the Japanese in the kimonos, and the Indians in their saris. You're seeing all this incredible people, and I was like, I had this epiphany moment. It's a Small World. Again, that was before the hour and a half, whatever. And I thought, the world's a beautiful place, Gary. Like, I really want my kids to explore the world. I want them to have these experiences, see the exotic cultures and people out there, and fall in love and try the different music. But I want them to know who they are. I want them to know in their heart that they're Jews, and I want them to come back to that. And it's my responsibility as a father to instill that in them. And so where I am in my journey, I guess, is still at this place of hoping that my kids, as a father, hoping my kids know who they are. And then when I launch them in the world, as you know, my oldest daughter's a senior and about to go out in the world. She's doing a leap year next year at Israel, and then she's going to college, hopefully somewhere. But I want her to experience the world and fall in love and travel, but I want her to know in her kishkas, in her heart, in her soul, who she is. And so I guess where I am on my journey is, how do I, now that I'm a leader of an organization in the community, how do I help the community also fall in love with their Jewishness, knowing that it's an evolving thing? How do I help them fall in love with the wanting to do more and to learn and to improve their Jewishness? So that's where I am right now. It's trying to improve myself so I could be a better steward of this thing for my kids and my community.
And I didn't write a book, but I'll take the moment to answer the question as well. You know, I was probably I grew up with a big family, lots of cousins. I have 28 first cousins. And I was probably the least likely to do anything Jewish. If you had to predict, most likely to do something Jewish, I was probably least likely. I was pretty tuned out, even though I went to Jewish day schools, Jewish summer camps, Jewish preschools. I was involved in Jewish youth groups. By the time I got after college and after a year in Tel Aviv, I kind of tuned out. And I said, I've done the Jewish thing. I kind of want to see what else is out there in the world. And I got interested in Burning Man and other things like that. And I took a year off and went to India and Nepal and backpacked and volunteered around. And that's when I started, the Jewish base that I had started coming up in new ways, where I'd hear Israeli backpackers talking about, oh, isn't it amazing that the Brahmin is wearing the sacred thread to remind them to be holy every day. And I'd be like, that's what tzitzit are, you know, the fringes that you wear if religious people may wear to remind them of holiness. Isn't it amazing that they're taking the food and they're saying a blessing before they eat? I'm like, in Judaism, you say a blessing before you eat as well. So I found that all of a sudden I was seeing it through a new lens. After I went out and saw things with a broader lens, I was able to appreciate the Jewish culture, Jewish traditions, Jewish wisdom in a different way, and start to reincorporate it in my own life. And in India, I started helping to gather Shabbat dinners and Passover seders where there'd be 200 backpackers. And I was thinking, something feels right here. That's what I want to do when I come back to the States. I thought I was going to go to rabbinical school. I took a part-time job at a JCC, and it turned into a lifelong career now. But now I want to find those ways to pass that on to my kids as well. That is important. And I find it comes up to me in surprise. You talked about how it evolves every day. I've just started a new doing Jewish practice, which as I noticed, I was getting in this terrible habit of waking up every morning and immediately just grabbing my phone and checking my email before I even sat up. I was like, yuck, this is horrible. And so I started saying a Jewish blessing, a prayer, Modeh Ani, which is just taking a moment before you rush into your day to say thank you, source of life, for returning my soul to me. Once again, that I'm here again another day. Thank you for your abundant care. And this prayer that I hadn't said in 40 years that I learned in Hebrew school came back, and I've adopted it as a practice. So I'm constantly looking for ways. I'm not saying Jewish is the only way. I'm not saying it's the best way. But I'm saying there is thousands of years of beauty and tradition to mine and to bring back. And that's where I'm at in my journey as a person, as a Jewish community leader, and as a father and a parent. So.
Love that. Beautiful. Thank you.
We're going to take one more.
All right.
Oh, I got the last. Zach, there was so much in the book that popped out at me, but one thing that you haven't talked about tonight in beyond the anecdote of your board member is something that I've been has given me a lot of hope over the last handful of years, is seeing the expansion of what was normal in our community. In other words, the normal that I'm talking about, and I don't mean it normal, but I grew up like you in an Ashkenazi community. And everybody in San Francisco looked like me. Every Jew looked like me. Luckily, I grew up in a household where we were well aware of the plight of the Ethiopian Jews and fought for them from an early age for me. But you use a term, radical inclusivity, in your book. And can you elaborate a little bit more on that concept?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. I didn't come up with the term. I just really like it. I think the radical inclusivity is what's necessary for us to get beyond this shifting ethnography. So in the book, I kind of lay out these 5, what I call meta trends for why we're at this moment. And so I come up with, I think, 5 answers to them. I think it's the most controversial part of the book. That's the part where people are going to be like, are you so sure about that? But that's okay. I want this to be actually like the Talmud, where, over generations, ideally. I don't know if it's going to last that long. Again, I'm trying to be, but like, people engage. I want you guys to kind of fight back, push back, argue back. But one of these sections of the answer to the shifting ethnography is radical inclusivity. How do we find ways to open our hearts and open our minds to recognizing that you can look like anything these days to be Jewish? And we happen to be blessed to live in one part of the world where we get that. Right? There's a couple of incredible organizations, the Bechol Hashon organization, which is based out of here, and the Jews of Color Initiative, which is based out of here. They're doing really important work to show Jemena, excuse me, which is Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. It's all coming out of the Bay Area because we're a little bit more open-minded. I spoke to the board of the Foundation for Jewish Camp a few years ago. They came out here. Like, most of them are New York-based. It's an incredible organization, by the way, really important, helping make Jewish camp affordable. And very New York-based, though. The leadership is New York-based. And when they came out here for their big fact-finding mission to see what West Coast Jewry is like, I said to them, you're going to need to recognize that intermarriage is coming soon to a theater near you. Like, stop wringing your hands and shrine gevalt about it. Like, find a way to make it a +1, not a -1. I'm not saying you have to go out and advocate for it, but embrace it. And they were like, right? They're still in this mindset of like, it's the worst thing, it's going to destroy you. And so the idea of radical inclusivity is recognizing that you can't stop progress. You can't stop things from moving forward. Maybe you don't like it, but get on board, right? Our grandparents' generation, Sam, they saw intermarriage very differently. As you know, my in-laws were the original intermarried couple because my father-in-law is Sephardi and my mother-in-law is Ashkenazi. I think you're also in the same family, right? And that was seen as like a no-no in the Sephardi culture, right? Now look where we are. They don't even bat an eye anymore with that, right? So I think we just have to, radical inclusivity means moving on past those old models. Excuse me.
So I think
Yes, Kathy.
Thank you both. Definitely, Zach, your book is brilliant.
Thank you.
Your words really matter.
Thank you.
From the marketing aspect,
Yes.
to make Jewish cool, Jew cool.
Yeah, Jew cool.
These are words of wisdom. Anybody can understand and embrace the warmth, the kindness, the soul that you're bringing forward, and to make Jews aspirational again.
Right.
How can we, listening, and the book, and you both spread this very, very important positive message at a time of great despair in the world, where we're watching genocide in real time in our handheld devices? Somebody has to bring the integrity and the voice, and certainly now we have a Zelensky. How can we seize this moment?
Great question, Kathy. I'll take a shot at it, and then maybe Paul. Just like Paul, I too just returned from a college tour with my oldest daughter. And what's been really interesting to see on these college tours is that Chabad is becoming really popular on college campuses. I see a lot of you nodding, so you get this, right? And even in our communities. But why is it happening on college campuses? When our kids are becoming more and more progressive, more and more feminist, more and more into radical inclusivity, why are they being attracted to an organization that still divides men and women and still doesn't allow it? Like, somehow they've made Jew cool. Chabad has made on campus, it's cool to be Jewish. Just come, hang out, have fun, have a couple l'chaims, have some food. But they've made it cool and fun to be Jewish, and it is working. They're not about like, let's have a debate over whether we should have somebody come who is pro-BDS or not pro-BDS. Like, that's not Chabad's thing. That stuff is important. It's important. But they've made it being Jewish cool because it's just like Jew pride. Jew pride is what they're all about, right? They're about something positive. So, Kathy, what we're trying to balance. This is very hard because right now we have a lot of people coming to us in our community. You probably do too, Paul, saying, help us, fight against anti-Semitism. There's been a resurgence of anti-Semitism. And I'm saying fighting against anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism or fighting against BDS is not just about being anti-Semitism, not anti-Zionism. Like, what's the pro? Where's the pro message? Where's the pro-Jew pride, Jew cool? And that's a really important part of this. So we have to show them that it's really fun and cool and can make the world a better place by being Jewish, right? And you don't only have to just be Jewish, but we can be the tip of the spear. So it's part of its messaging, part of its marketing, part of it is just role modeling and having kids like your two boys out there being like, I'm part of the mainstream world and I'm cool, and making other people be like, that's cool, right? Zelensky's cool to be Jewish. It's role models like that, but it's also just making it fun and making it interesting and making it pertinent and meaningful. I don't think there's any single silver bullet, but I think Chabad has something for us to model ourselves after, interestingly, something for us to look at.
So I would agree with all of that, and I would also say, again, it's one of the things JCCs do best, which is, it's one of the things that are most challenging about JCCs is we're running like 10 different businesses or 10 different programs and services at the same time, so that can be difficult to manage. But it also creates a lot of different doors for people to walk through. And so for some people, it's presenting Jewish life and Jewish culture, like your TACOLIS acronym, through arts and culture. For other people, it could be through sports, like the Maccabi Games. For other people, we've talked about doing a combined trip with the JCCs to go to Israel in the near future. So but it's doing it in a way that is open and welcoming for all. No matter what type of Jew you are, or if you're not Jewish. Whether you're interested in Jewish life and culture, whether you're partnered with someone who is Jewish, the door is open. The door is open for the youngest, for the oldest, and all these different avenues and channels. That's what I think we're trying to do here. So it's not, my answer to you is, it's not one way. Just like the Passover Seder has texts, it has foods, smells, it has it has theater involved in it. It was the ultimate multimodal way to engage the kids in telling the story before there was hyperlinks and iPads. That's what we need to be. We need to be telling the story and inviting people into conversation. So that's my answer.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time.
Are we doing the Oprah thing, Stephanie? Yes, Oprah. Ooh, we're doing the Oprah thing. All right, so here's what Stephanie did before you guys all got here. Some of you have stickers under your chairs. If you were lucky enough to have a sticker under your chair, you get a free copy of the book. So look under your chair. There's only like a couple of them. It's on the metal bar in the front. It's on the metal bar in the front. No. Only because we didn't have enough. There's a bit of a supply chain issue out there. You may have heard about this. So the books are stuck. Amazon has them because Amazon controls the world. So if you want the books, you can get them from Amazon, or I can get you a deal tonight if you sign up through the publisher. It just might take a while. But we only had a handful of books, so Stephanie said, let's give them out rather than sell the 3 or 4 that we had. Sorry for not having more, but thank you for inviting me, Paul.
And thank you for all of you who joined us tonight.